Killing it in sales is all about one thing, and that is alignment. You've got to ask yourself the question, is what you're selling the solution to your buyer's problems? Does it alleviate their pain points? But the tricky thing is though that 95% of the time, well, your prospects are only ever going to tell you about the surface level pains. But for you to close a deal successfully, you've got to be able to solve the problem that's actually causing those surface level pains. You need to go a few levels deeper. Think of it like this from a doctor's perspective. You've got to treat the disease, not the symptoms. And today we're going to look at 5 word-for-word questions that you can ask to get to the bottom of what the real disease that your buyer is suffering from really is. Hi, my name is Will and I make selling simple. Now, understanding pain points, real pain points, is the key to your selling success. That's why in today's video, we're going to talk about surface level pain points and how they open up the opportunity to find these deeper level pains that we really need to get into. Then we're going to jump into the word for word questions that you can use to uncover your buyer's real pain points. We'll look at questions like, what's holding you back? How do you plan to solve this? What's your deadline for solving this problem? What does your boss think about all of this? And finally, what's stopping you from solving it yourself? That final question is one of my favorite questions that I ask all the time on our sales calls when we are closing new business over at Salesman Simple Academy for our enterprise clients or for individuals like you. More information on Salesman Simple Academy below this video in the description. And we're going to break down each of these questions one by one, so stay tuned. But before we get into the questions, let's talk about surface level pains. Now, during the first few conversations you're going to have with buyers, you're only ever going to scratch the surface of the pain points if you go down the traditional discovery sales call route. And this is because your buyers don't always have the expertise to really get to the bottom of their own issues. And so you're left with this pile of superficial problems, not the real ones that are causing the buyer the real pain that if we can solve, they're going to be really happy to work with us. Now, this can actually be good news for salespeople like us, because if buyers did have the knowledge, the products, or the expertise needed to dive deeper into their own pains, well, maybe they could solve them without your help and the company that you represent would be out of business. So this leaves a gap between the buyer knowing that they've got a problem, knowing where they want to end up, but not knowing how to get from one side of this to the other. And that's where we come in. We close that gap. But to do that, we need to move past these superficial pain points and get to the real heart of the buyer's problem. And we can do that by asking these 5 questions that we're going to cover in this video. And just to add a little bit more context to these questions, you've got to understand that there are 4 surface layer buyer pains that your prospects fall into. Category 1 is financial pains. And you can spot these when the buyer will give you statements like, well, revenue is up, but profits are down, or I don't have enough visibility of the numbers to make a sound financial decision here, or we're only profitable enough to keep the doors open. Category number 2 are people pains, and these are shown with statements like, well, our team's morale is super low, our managers don't drive innovation, our best employees keep leaving to go to competitors. Number 3, we have productivity pains. This is where your buyer might say, well, we keep missing our own clients' deadlines, or we have quality issues that are leading to higher levels of refunds than what we can handle, or we're just spending too much of our time in meetings and nothing's getting done. And finally, we have what's called process pains. And these show up in statements like, well, our hiring process is a mess, or we have no system to monitor our sales pipeline, or the customer service department is just inundated and can't keep up. All right, so now you know the 4 categories of pain points and you've heard some examples of how a prospect might share them with you. Let's take a look at the questions that we can ask to dig deeper and go a layer below each one of these surface level pain points to really understand what's up in the buyer's world. And again, just to reiterate this, we're not doing this just for the sake of having a long conversation with a prospect. We want to dig deeper into the buyer's pain so that we can align our service to the deepest, most impactful pain points. Because when we align our service to a real deep pain, it becomes a must-have rather than, perhaps this is something that we can consider next quarter. So the first question that we can ask to dig deeper into the buyer's pain is, hey, what is the main thing holding your company or division or group, or however you want to frame it, back from growing right now? And this question is great at eliciting a very specific response, one that lands your prospect's pains into one of the 4 categories that we covered a little bit earlier on: of financial, people, productivity, or processing pain. And this question is typically a good starting point when we want to then go deeper with these other questions to get more in depth with the pain that we can solve. So once we've asked that, the next question we can ask is, how do you plan to solve this pain point? Now, an uneducated buyer is going to tell you, well, I'm unsure, I'm not certain how to solve this issue. And this is an incredible opportunity for you to educate the buyer on how your service, not the market, not how other options out there, your service can help the buyer solve and relieve this pain. The flip side of this, and this is becoming more and more common in the modern B2B sales cycle, a more educated buyer who's further down the sales process might have a few ideas of how they can solve this pain, but clearly they've not actually taken action, they've not solved it for themselves, so there's something holding them back from taking action. So, of course, the next logical step is to uncover what that thing is that's stopping them from solving this problem themselves, which moves us on to question number 3. And we can uncover lots of information when we ask the buyer the question, what is your deadline to solve this problem? Because if the buyer tells us that there is no deadline, then the problem is not very painful for the buyer, and perhaps we've been misled up to this point. And that means if the problem isn't very painful, they're not going to be very motivated to solve it, meaning that you're going to have to work harder and harder and harder to just have the chance, the potential of winning the business here. The takeaway? Avoid doing business with individuals that do not have the pain that you solve as a priority. They are not worth your effort. Alternatively, if your buyer does have a set deadline to solve this pain point by, you've now got a very, very qualified buyer that's well worth working with and engaging further. We now need to keep probing and to see if there is budget and authority to solve this pain. This is where we move on to question number 4, where we're going to uncover the true level of the pain that the buyer is in. So after you've gone through the previous steps and questions, it's time to ask, hey, what does your boss think about all of this? Or if you're dealing with the executive and the C-suite, hey, what do your customers think about this? What do your shareholders think about this? What does the person who holds you accountable think about all of this? And this is important, right? We all know this. Authority is part of every band, medic, medpic, all of these, our own diagnosis framework over at Sell Made Simple Academy. Authority is important to the sales process. We all know this, and it's a common obstacle to a smooth selling process if your buyer is lacking the budget or authority needed to make the actual purchase themselves. Maybe they've got to go to their manager to request funding, or maybe they need to get permission from their boss before they can pull the trigger on the deal. In either case, closing is going to be a pain, so you need to spend a little bit of extra time convincing the stakeholders that your product is worth the value and the price that you're charging. So if you ask this question, your buyer says, well, my boss has been on my back about this for weeks now, I really need to get this sorted, then you've uncovered that the buyer likely both has the budget and the authority to solve this problem because the boss is pestering them about it. And of course for you, that means an easier, more qualified sale. And this leaves us with one final question that you've got to ask the buyer to go beyond these surface level pain points that they've been describing to you so far and get to the real crux of the matter. I ask this question on every single sales call that I do. Right? The final question that you need to ask is, and now typically if I'm on a Zoom call, I will sit back in my seat as I say this, prompting the prospect that, hey, open up here. I'm happy for you to give me a 5-minute rant if that's what's needed. I'll sit back in my seat and I'll go, okay, well, what's stopping you from solving this yourself today? And this is the most important question in this sequence of questions I'm sharing with you in this video. Because so far we've been living in the future with, what is your deadline? What does your boss think about all this? Now we need to pull the buyer back. We need to drag them back into the real world. We need to get them to understand, well, what's stopping them from solving this now, today, themselves? And this will intensify the buyer's pain, it's going to drive urgency, and it's going to make it far more likely that they're going to take action on any suggestions that you give them of how to solve this problem. Now at this point, hopefully the buyer turns around and says, well, I can't solve it today and I can't solve it personally because of these. We need some help. We need your service. We need your tool. We need you, Will, to come in and help train our sales team. At this point, you've got a quality, qualified sales lead on your hands that's probably pretty close to buying already. And you can ask these questions in one phone call. That's why this is so powerful. You can rapidly compress your sales cycle length by just asking these questions in a 10-15 minute phone call. And after all that, well, you know what you got to do. You've got to close the next step. So the more that you can align your service with your buyer's pains, the better your chances of closing the deal. Now, at first, your buyers will only share the surface level pain points with you when you first get them on a call. And these pain points can be financial, people pain, productivity pain, or process pain points as well. But when you ask these questions, you dig a little bit deeper into the buyer's pains, your product goes from something that, well, we might consider this next quarter to a must-have that ends up in a sale. And you can dig into the buyer's pain points by asking the following questions. What's holding you back from solving this problem on your own? How do you plan to solve this? What's your deadline for solving this very problem that we're discussing right now? And what does your boss think about all of this? And finally, what's stopping you from solving this yourself today? So don't settle for the superficial when it comes to pain points, especially in a B2B sale. This is somewhat different in a B2C sale, but when you're doing large deal sizes and your prospect's not spending necessarily their own money, they're spending the organization's money, this is so valuable and important. Because the deeper you dig and the better that you can align your product with that deeper pain, well, that transforms your solution into a downright essential purchase. So there we go. I hope you enjoyed this video. Why not click the video that's on the screen right now and continue making selling simple.